What's up, folks? This is Justin from Books, Bricks, and Boards, and today we've really reached a milestone, as this is the fifth and final box of the BECMI line, and whereas the others tread upon already familiar grounds, the Immortals box takes us places where we never dreamed that D&D could go. The question is it comprehensible by we mere mortals? So without further ado, this is Building with BECMI, Part 5, the Immortals set. If you are enjoying the content, please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe, as gaining followers may be the only way to gain the power points to defeat the Demogorgon.
The Demogorgon is tired of your silly human bickering!
If you still want to learn more about the mysteries of the Immortals set and other more esoteric gaming pursuits, please consider heading on over to the Books, Bricks, and Boards Discord channel to meet the best group of gamers on this side of the Primaterial Plane.
We're not worthy!
Link in the description. What's in the box? Way back in the good old days, 1986 to be precise, TSR released the final box of its venerable BECMI lineup. Long past the humble beginnings of the Holmes Basic Set or the Mulvey Cook BX books, this box grows the game in ways heretofore never seen in a D&D product. Sure, since the little original brown box, there had been supplements that would allow players to interact with the physical manifestations of deities and demigods, but never before had a player had the opportunity to become one. With a suggested 40 to 50 million in sales of the BECMI box sets, there were people all around the world whom considered this to be their version of the world's first role-playing game. But none of them had ever seen a set of rules that departed from the established norms nearly so much as the box set that they now opened was such a massive departure from the original rules and so much variation of play options to cover, one would rightfully assume that the Immortals set would be a hulking tome of titanic proportions, but that assumption would be proven wrong. With a 64-page DM's book and a 32-page player's book, the offering was no larger than the previous entries in the BECMI lineup, yet it arguably covered as much complexity as the other four boxes combined. To start with, we will cover the contents of the player's book. Frank seemed to know that this would be a difficult concept to broach, as after the obligatory preface about the culmination of the BECMI line, the next section is trying to explain that everything has changed for both the player and their character, but that the best way to approach it is to keep in mind the form that your character has taken up to this point, and take in the differences in the new set as they come. He seems to set up what would be a slow introduction of the new rules and concepts, a style which has been proven effective throughout the BECMI line to this point.
That's not gonna happen.
Unfortunately, at least for me, what followed was the closest thing to trying to drink from an open fire hydrant that I have found in any role-playing game. That isn't to say that what is presented isn't complete or presented in such a way that it can be manipulated to good effect at the table. It isn't to say that it is either. In my multiple read-throughs, what I experienced was something that I can't recall ever having experienced, outside of one time in my gaming life. In my 4 decades of gaming, I've played and ran at last count more than 40 different RPGs, and they have covered the gamut of the complexity and clarity spectrum from the very simple and straightforward like the original White Hack to the incredibly detailed and complex like the Aces and Eights Western RPG. Some took a mere hour or two to have a great understanding of, while others took several days and a little bit of hand-wringing to come to grips with. One, after taking the time to actually comprehend it, left me thinking, okay, I can actually understand it now, but I can't really imagine ever taking a group through the process that I just forced myself to learn, or moreover, even playing the game in someone else's group. That game was one of the earlier editions of the Champions Supers RPG. Before the use of spreadsheet character creators, I went about developing a character by hand in my preteen years, and upon understanding the process, I quickly came to the realization that the game was in many ways unnecessarily complex, and it was incredibly time-consuming for me to understand some pretty standard concepts that I had learned from many times names in prior systems. It was the gaming equivalent to an ancient Greek manuscript to my eyes at the time. That isn't to say that it isn't a good game, as I have read numerous folks report that they played ongoing campaigns for decades. It just wasn't a game that clicked in my brain at the time. But I have often considered revisiting the line to see if an older, more mature gamer would have a better chance of grokking it. That was the only time I ever had that feeling as a gamer. That is, up until trying to comprehend the Immortals set. Oddly, while I never owned the copy of the Immortals set as a kid, I did have a copy of the Wrath of the Immortals, kind of the rules cyclopedia version of this box, and I recall creating some deities in that system with a friend and having a pretty good time doing so. Now I wonder, was that just my fresh-faced youth appreciating such an incredible departure from the game I knew so well, or was the presentation more aligned with what I needed to absorb it all? Perhaps a later video to explore that subject more fully would be in order. Without further aside or delay, back to the topic at hand, and that is the BECMI take on the Immortal rules. The rules here break the concept of Immortals into spheres of power, with matter, energy, time, thought, and entropy each covering a specific sphere of immortality. Players would each specialize in one, which would determine their expertise in different powers, though entropy would be reserved for NPCs alone. What follows is a progressive deluge of information and alien concepts which left this gamer reeling from the sheer weight of the conceptual avalanche. Starting with Section 1, entitled Changes, we cover a lot of ground. To start with, rather than XP, the characters would measure their advancement with power points, which initially were assigned on a 1 for 10,000 experience points basis. So a 36 level fighter with the minimum XP to attain that level, 3,480,000, who somehow attained immortality upon reaching that level before gaining any additional XP, working in hypotheticals here, bear with me, would now be an immortal with 348 power points. These power points would prove to be usable resources, both permanent or only temporary use, depending upon the task that they were used for, as well as the means by which the immortals would grow in ranks, as levels were a concept for mere mortal characters apparently. The variety of actions that one could spend these power points on is quite immense and covers many pages of charts and summary explanations. Suffice it to say that one could use them to reform their battered body, create a new form altogether, or perform a huge variety of miracles of all manner imaginable. It could certainly give a gamer analysis paralysis to consider the incredible variety of the different options available to them. I mentioned creating a new form as one of these options, and that is briefly discussed in this first section, but only more thoroughly covered in a later section towards the end of the book. The long and short of it is that while on the prime material plane, the one we are on, the hero would assume the same form that he had as a mortal, but when traveling to other planes, he could assume other forms limited only by the imagination of the player and the availability of their power points to create it. The rest of what follows in Section 1 sets the table for the rest of the book, which in my opinion was quite confusing.
I don't get it.
As the concepts were framed in familiar terms such as AC, hit dice, movement, and the standard 6 ability scores, but they often worked wildly different than the way that we had been accustomed to seeing them. At least in my case, I would have been better able to comprehend these concepts if they were completely untethered from the original terms that we had established our working knowledge of. But that just could be me. Ability scores, for one, would be ranging from 1 to 100 now instead of the standard 3 to 18, though initially these keep the same value as your mortal form. They would also be paired into greater and lesser talents, which would be effectively a pairing of 3 different ability scores determined by the immortal sphere choice. For example, a matter immortal would have a greater talent value determined by strength, constitution, and dexterity, which their lesser talents would be a sum of wisdom, charisma, and intelligence.
Well, just a second there, Professor.
When testing ability scores, DMs would roll a D100 against the ability score, adding a sizable modifier based upon the difficulty of the task and the rank of the immortal, with lower ranking immortals getting larger bonuses, presumably to give them some realistic chance for success. As an example, if one were playing a temporal immortal, one of the lower ranking immortals, and needed to test strength and had a very impressive 18 as a score, and the task was determined by the DM to be easy, they would add 55 points, the modifier for an easy task for that rank, to their 18 strength to need a roll of 73 or less on the D100 to be successful. This isn't difficult, but it is a bit arbitrary as the numbers seem to keep the success rates pretty similar even as the immortal advances. There are also talent checks, which are similar but work off of an average of the 3 greater or lesser talent sums, otherwise working the same as an ability check. The book continues to throw new concepts out and then promptly moves on to other new concepts before I could really understand the prior, with Immortals gaining new ways to attack, new saving throws, and a new concept of material items, as in you kind of just imagine what you want to have and you have it. It's all pretty high-level things. Section 2 finally defines some of the expectations of the different spheres and how they align with the different paths to immortality that were briefly covered in the Master Set. The Dynast path would result in a Time Sphere Immortal, being favored by clerics and having a goal to promote change in all and maintain time's flow. The Hero path would result in a Thought Sphere Immortal, favored by thieves and having a goal to conceive and categorize all of existence.
To use your mind.
The Paragon path would result in an Energy Sphere Immortal, favored by magic users and with a goal of creating more energy and activity. Finally, the Polymath path would result in a Matter Sphere Immortal, favored by fighters and with a purpose to withstand destruction and decay. As a reminder, there's also a Sphere for Entropy, available only to NPCs, which wants to destroy everything to make room for the new. The rest of the 8 pages of Section 2 cover anti-magic rules, as all Immortals have some anti-magic protections, PowerPoint recovery, physical recovery, the benefits of different planes to different spheres of Immortals, movement, including universal, interplanar, interdimensional, and 3-dimensional varieties, combat, with an updated order of events for Immortals to cover new methods of attack, and new attack forms, aura, physical, magical, power, and ability score, each of which is usable in different situations, some being only valid against mortals or others only usable against other immortals. That is a whole lot to cover in 8 pages, and conceptually, it seems like a lot for players to consider at the table.
Yes, it's horrible, this idea.
My players have enough trouble deciding whether to sneak prior to attacking, let alone deciding to attack an enemy with an aura, physical, magical, power, or ability score related attack. It just seems like a lot to consider. Section 3 covers Immortal Magic, which has variation on cost and power points related to the Immortal's chosen sphere, each specializing in different miraculous magical feats. This being 6 pages, it provides a variety of effects, many based upon existing spells or class abilities that can be recreated by expending power points. This is all very cool conceptually, but if you can literally do anything, it is a lot to keep track of, and it seems like a system that is ready to be exploited by a well-prepared player, or completely lose an unprepared player. Section 4 covers character advancement, which is regulated by a combination of necessary power points as well as minimum and maximum ability score values, which can be bought up by permanently spending power points. At only 1 page, this is easily the most comprehensible of the player's book sections in my opinion. Section 5 covers the character's home plane and their forms, which are how they represent themselves on different planes of existence. Each form can have a variety of different abilities and statistical benefits, so the character sheet included provides spots for 2 different forms, which will be in addition to their original character sheet, which covers much of how they interact on the prime material plane. The book ends with a brief discussion on how players can use the rules from the Master Set to create artifacts with their power points as well. Then we have 4 pages of tables and indices, and that wraps the player's book. Are you confused yet? That is to be forgiven, because your intrepid host most certainly is. Each of the prior boxes introduced slowly the concepts that would define those levels of play, and then built upon what you learned in the prior box, creating a logical and very teachable progression of the rules. This felt like we took all the blocks we had built upon, knocked them over, and said, okay, instead of building a castle this time, let's build a spaceship. Just like the kid whose blocks had been scattered across the room, it didn't leave me wanting to build more, but rather left me considering a different place to play. The DM's book, while longer, didn't provide as much clarity to the process as I had hoped, but I think it is best summed up by the postscript written by Mr. Mincer at the end. Similar to the original set published in 1974, this final box set opens many doors without entering them. Many possibilities are mentioned, but limits on time and space for a mere mortal such as I have limited the amount of detail. Develop the information in any way you wish. If you find areas where more detail would be extremely helpful, write with a post office box to Lake Geneva listed. I can only imagine that many a great question or idea was pondered in that P.O. box, But I would wager a far larger volume of mail was looking to parse out exactly how this all was meant to be played out at the table, with a group of eager players bent upon extraplanar domination. The DM's book spends most of the first 13 pages discussing the concepts of the multiverse, remembering that this is prior to the mainstream popularization of the process in cinema. Frank does a good job of abbreviating the concepts that Jeff Grubb laid out in his Manual of the Planes book, as well as giving some guidelines for creating encounter tables to cover extraplanar adventures. Page 14 covers some errata to amend the master set as it pertained to the Immortals rules, which should be expected as he was trying to build that box to be compatible with a product that had to that point not existed beyond a basic concept. What follows is 4 pages of what an Immortal level campaign might look like, and it really exemplifies what makes Frank such a good writer and game designer.
I'm a fan.
While I can't see myself running or playing in another Immortal set campaign, I could see myself quite happily playing in Frank's vision of that game. From there, we get a couple of pages of new magic options, which cover specific ways that Immortals can shape reality through their magic. And then several more pages on designing games around Immortals, and a collection of tables in the new character sheet. Seeing the character sheet reminds me of an omission of a concept from the player's book, which involves the true name. This is a concept from classic literature and folklore whereby powerful beings might be controlled or harmed by knowledge of their true name, presumably different than the one that they use on the prime material plane. This concept is used in the Immortal set and is added to by adding another part of the name with each separate rank of immortality, but with the caveat that only the Immortal knows their true name and cannot be magically forced to provide it. So the question becomes obvious, why would they ever share it? The idea is floated that this is a way that Immortals can gain each other's trust and alliances by offering a piece of their true name. It's an interesting concept, but seems like it would be hard to make a relevant part of the game without a masterful use of storytelling to build up to that point, beyond my level of game mastering at any rate. Next, we have 24 pages of creatures with separate Immortal statistics covering their power points as well as their sphere of influence. These cover a wide variety of weird and fantastical entries from dittos to dragons and even demons. Of particular note is the inclusion of Orcus and the Demogorgon, both of which provide particularly nasty challenges.
Puny god.
To round out the book, we get a nice bibliography and an inspirational reading appendix, which reads like a BECMI Appendix N, a real who's who of fantasy literature. And that, my friends, was what was in the final box of the BECMI line, Imagining the Immortals. This is the part of the video where I would normally share my thoughts about what a campaign at this level might look like, but I'm going to be honest with you. I'm at a loss for words. I can't see how I, as a DM or player, could make this style of game work for me. I think that, firstly, as evidenced by my struggle to grok the concepts in the player's book, this would necessitate a very small table.
That's a really good idea.
Preferably 1 or 2 besides the DM, and then come together for a larger group when a situation necessitated collaboration. My hunch is that players and DMs would both need a lot of time to become comfortable playing in this type of game. That isn't to say that it couldn't be rewarding, as I could see where if one invested in the journey to actually attain this level, they would be quite attached to their characters and possibly not ready to let them go. That said, in my experience, it has been more fun to allow these immensely powerful characters to be part of a backstory and inspiration for future groups to reflect upon, rather than as an active world-shaping participant in the current game. As a note, just because that's my preference does not make it the only or best way to proceed at your table. The good and the bad. First, the good. This completes the line, which is no small feat. To set out to create a 5-box line of products to have a fully realized role-playing experience from 0 to true hero and beyond is something to be proud of, and this definitely accomplishes that. 2, it provides a new way to play, and at this point, having a new way to play is quite a feat because you've done pretty much everything. 3, and this is probably my favorite aspect of this box, is it gives a DM a carrot to dangle for the players. Sometimes the concept of aspiring to that immortal level is more attractive than what it's like when you actually get there, and in that way, I feel like this is a success. Now, the bad. Complexity. I feel like there is a large amount of unnecessary complexity in this product. There are many ways that we could have went about trying to do this style of play, and I think a much simpler version would have been better, because if the mechanics are complex and the concepts are complex, that creates an untenable situation. Number 2, clarity. There is a lot of explanation that needs to go with creating new ideas of what reality can be, and unfortunately we just don't have the page count to accomplish that. Frank does a nice job with what he's given, but unfortunately there's just not enough room to accomplish that task. Number 3, commitment. To actually go from level 1 to 36 and then to complete a full Immortal level campaign is a huge commitment. If you are awarding XP as laid out in the BECMI line, this would take an enormous amount of time to get to this point, and it just seems like it is a very, very small and limited pool of players that would get to this point. Summary. This is the first of my Building with BECMI reviews that was predominantly a negative. This is clearly not my cup of tea. I struggled with the concepts and the means to get a table to enjoy those concepts. This was an ambitious project, to be sure, and for me it misses the mark for my hopes. All of that said, it is not without its merit. Sometimes it isn't necessary to have a definitive endpoint to create a great story. Sometimes it's better to dangle that concept out there in the ether as an aspirational goal, a nearly unattainable place to aim for, and in that way it becomes something different for each person participating. I think that's what the Immortals set is for me. Better as a concept, as an aspiration, than it is as an application to the game I am by now so very loyal and indebted to. Frank Menser and his BECMI line gave us not just a game, but an engine by which millions upon millions of people were able to enjoy and share a common experience of building worlds of our own, and in that, his journey was a success, even if the final destination was not what was expected when we got there. But those are my thoughts, and now I'd love to hear yours. Did you ever play this box? Did you try the later Wrath of Immortals box? Have you come up with any house rules that made this type of game sing for your table? Tell me about all of this and more in the comments section. I'm looking forward to having that conversation. While this might be the end of the box sets, it isn't the end of this series, as I still have one more video for this initial Building with BECMI series. That being the Rules Cyclopedia, where it all comes together. So until then, this has been Justin from Books, Bricks, and Boards. Good gaming, and God bless.